Hi, my name is Christine Church, and this is my beautiful horse, Kobe Joe. Welcome to our channel. Okay, so today I would like to discuss the importance of forage in a horse's diet. Now, forage doesn't just mean grass. Forage also means hay. And there's different types of hay, and there's different cuttings of hay. So anyways, horses are forage feeders, and they're also trickle feeders, which means that the bulk of their diet should always be forage. It's simply to help buffer acids that they have that are going through their system all the time. So I have my little model horse here. I took the poor little guy apart so that I could show you that. Now, see these two? They're going down next to each other. One's the trachea, one's the esophagus. Okay? Now, the esophagus is where the food goes down, and then it goes into the stomach. Okay? And then from the stomach, it goes to the small intestine and onwards. And that's the foregut. And then the hindgut is the large intestine on. Now, when a horse, sometimes a horse chokes, and if you have a horse, you've probably heard that term. Choke just means that a horse got a little bit of food or hay caught in the esophagus. And it's usually not, unlike people, it doesn't cut off their airway so they can still breathe. And like my horse, he gets minor chokes, which means sometimes he'll get a tiny bit of hay or something stuck in his esophagus, and he'll just stand there and not eat, and then just kind of, he works his muscles and gets it back up into his mouth and then swallows it properly. Most of the time, that's what happens, but if liquid starts to come out of the horse's nose and mouth, then you really want to call a vet, because they could breathe it back in, and that can cause pneumonia and all kinds of other problems. So anyways, we can talk about choke another time, but so that's where you got, it goes the mouth to the esophagus and onto the stomach, which in this model, it's not the greatest, but the small intestine is on top, and then the large intestine is on the bottom. Unlike people, a horse has acid that runs through their system at all times, whether they're eating or not, okay? They are creating this acidic environment in their stomach. And a horse that does not have enough forage, if they're fed just a little bit of hay in the morning, a little bit of hay maybe at lunch, and a little bit of hay. Horses are not made to be meal takers, okay? Humans can do that because they have a gallbladder. Horses do not have a gallbladder. They cannot store fat to wait till the next meal, okay? So they need that forage. I mean, this is how they were made. This is how they evolved, as forage feeders. Which means that if they have something like grass, which is their main diet all the time, they don't need anything else. If they're a performance horse, they may need a little extra something here and there. But one thing horses definitely do not need is grain. And that is such a huge misconception in the horse world, that horses need grain, because they don't. Especially a horse that's not working hard. So if you have a horse that is working hard, again, the majority of their diet should be forage. And then grain should be an add-on as necessary. So it goes into the small intestine, and then the small intestine works to take out certain nutrients before hitting the large intestine, which takes out more nutrients of different types and goes into the bloodstream. And then eventually it goes on to the rest. And, well, this is just putting it all simply. And we know where it goes from there. So anyways, that is the reason why forage is so important in a horse's diet, not grain. I see too often people will say, well, my horse looks fine. He gets, all this grain, and he gets a little bit of hay here, a little bit of hay there. But in essence, what's going on inside that horse is not good. And it's literally starving him, even if he doesn't look it on the outside. Because the grain may give them the calories, but they're not good calories. They're not proper calories. I'm sure you've heard in diets with people and stuff about good fats and bad fats. And, well, with a horse, you have sort of the same thing, though we're very different in the way we digest. With a horse, in the same way, I mean, you can say, okay, they're getting their proper caloric intake with the grain, but it's not the right type for the way a horse is built. And, they are built to eat little bits of forage at all times, day and night. You see a lot of horses will be fed a few flakes of hay at night, and that's all they'll have all night. When they finish with that hay, at whatever time, they have nothing in their stomach from that moment until the next morning. And this does a lot of damage on the inside that most people just can't see. And it does cause a lot of problems. And when these problems arise, people make excuses. And they say, oh, it must have been because of this or that. They never realize what really caused it. If a horse gets gas colic, now that can happen from several different sources. More common in a horse that does not have forage all the time. Because if there's nothing in there to fill that stomach, to buffer the acid and keep that stomach and keep the motility of the intestines going, then gas can build up. And that's actually the most common colic of most horses. And most of it, not all, but most of it is because most horses are not fed properly. They need to be fed like horses. And that means having forage and the proper forage all the time. The average horse will eat about 2% of their body weight in forage every day. My horse is 1,100 pounds, so that's 22 pounds of forage a day. Now, I did a little experiment a few years back where and I still weigh his hay sometimes, but I was weighing everything. And then I would weigh what he had left over in the morning, and then I would weigh what he had when he went outside. And I figured out that he eats having 24/7 hay all the time. He never runs out of hay. He will eat only about 22 pounds of hay. Horses will self-regulate if given enough hay all the time. They eventually say, okay, when you first if you have your horse on one of those bad diets where they're getting a couple flakes here, a couple flakes there, then if you first all of a sudden give them a ton of hay, they're going to, of course, eat every little bit because to their mind, they're not going to get any more. So they're hungry, they're starving, their insides are screaming for forage. That's why you get horses that they start to have behavioral problems. A lot of that comes from they're just hungry. And their body can't work the way it's supposed to. Their mind can't work the way it's supposed to because they're being fed all these grains that are usually high sugar, which makes them hot. And, you get all of this. And that's the reason why a lot of times you will get behavioral problems when you don't feed a horse properly. So I recommend weighing your hay and giving your horse enough, at least the 2%, if not allowing them to have, I let my horse have as much hay as he wants. And he just eats the 22, 23 pounds of hay every day. I know exactly what he's going to eat, so I know how much to put in front of him, whether he's in the stall, outside. I know how much to put in front of him because he never eats more than what his body requires. And every horse will do that if given the amount of time and the preference. I've seen it a million times where people gave their horses, suddenly started giving their horses a lot of hay. And they're like, but he just ate it all. He ate every bit of it. Of course he did. He's starving. But after about a week or so, they started to notice the horse slowing down and eating less. And they would start leaving little bits behind because suddenly their brain is going, I have food in front of me all the time. So there you go. So that's the best thing you can do for any horse, is to make sure that if they're on grass all the time, that's the best for them, if they can have it. Now, my horse has Cushing's and insulin resistance. He can't have a lot of grass. And he definitely can't have grass in the spring and in the fall, because that's when grass is usually highest in sugars because it's stressed out because the weather's changing. That's like here in the Northeast. It may be different in your area. But that is the importance, because forage, like I said, will buffer the acids and help prevent a lot of problems. Because the other thing that happens when a horse does not get enough forage is the microphilia and the bacteria in the hindgut, which is the large intestine they start to really get messed up. They die, and everything starts to just really get messed up. And that's another reason. People, even if you don't see it on the outside, it is happening on the inside. And your horse is probably not happy. They've probably been trained, I have to behave myself or else. But no horse is happy when they don't have that the instinct to eat. And that's what they're made for. That's everything about them, from their teeth, which grind the forage. And that's another thing. That's another very important thing, is that when you grind the forage, when they're actually chewing and their teeth are grinding, okay, the more they do that, which hay allows them to have that constant grinding, then they develop saliva. Horses do not develop saliva unless they're actively eating. Saliva in a horse has bicarbonates in it. Bicarbonates help reduce acid. So again, you're not only helping to buffer what's inside the horse, all the acids in there, but now you've got all that chewing, the saliva is coming down, and it's got the bicarbonates. A lot of ulcers are caused because of horses that don't have hay, and then they go and they work, and their stomach is empty, and it's splashing up on the sensitive upper part of the stomach. And that's a video for a whole other time. But anyways, I wanted to mention this, and I have a little video that I did of the first cut hay, second cut hay, because here in the Northeast, at least, the first cutting, when you get a field, they cut the hay down. It has seed heads. That's how you can tell the difference. And then when this next batch grows up and it's cut again, there's no seed heads because they've been cut off in the first cutting. Also, sugars are lower down in the grass or the hay. So the first cutting should, most of the time it can be different, vary in the amount of sugars. And usually first cut has a little bit less, second cut has more. There's weather that depends on it. There's all kinds of things that depend on what kind of sugar level your horse's hay will have. First, I've seen second cuts that had lower sugar levels than first. Not usually. But I do have my horse's hay tested, and I'm going to let you go and watch this little video that I made of the hay, and I talk about soaking it to get sugars out in case your horse is like mine and may have a metabolic issue, such as Cushing's, insulin resistance. Their sugars are just going to explode in their system. Let you go see that video. And now if you look at these hays, okay, this is second cut hay. This is first cut hay. Look at them together. These were all done. This was done last year. This was cut last year, and this was actually cut this year. This is actually fresher hay. But second cutting hay has higher sugar levels. This is very high in sugar. I had it tested, and this one's in the process of being tested. But this should be about 8% NSC, and this one is 15%, which is extremely high. So in order to feed it to my horse, it has to be soaked. Because soaking hay for about an hour in cold water pulls out about 30% of the sugars. So, and I noticed that my horse isn't as gaga over it after it's been soaked because it's not as much sugar, but it's better for him. So this shows you the difference. Now, I've seen second cut hay that was this color and first cut hay that was this color. So you can't go by the color. The way you tell first from second, if you don't know, is by this. See that? That's called a seed head. First cut hay has seed heads. Any other cutting after first cut, see, this is from the first cut. There's no seed heads in here. See that? Because the seed heads were cut off with the first cutting. So that's how you can tell the difference. Welcome back. So the other type of hay that is really a legume is alfalfa. Contrary to popular belief, alfalfa is actually extremely low in sugars, or as you heard in the video, NSC. NSC is non-structural carbohydrates, and it is a combination of water-soluble carbohydrates, simple sugars, and starch. And that is what you want to test for a horse that you may need a lower NSC. Now, alfalfa is extremely good for almost every horse in small doses. Now, why do I say small doses? Because alfalfa, though it's low in sugar, is very high in protein. So it's good for them, but not at more than about 1% of their total forage intake. You don't want to overload them with that protein. And that's why a lot of grains are bad too, because the high protein levels. If you have a horse that's working, obviously they can handle more. But alfalfa helps buffer acid as well. And it's very good for their stomach, and it's extremely good to feed to a horse that has Cushing's or insulin resistance or, you know, any of those issues because of the low sugar levels. But it really depends on your horse, and it's best to talk to your vet about whether or not your horse should have alfalfa. In most cases, Cushing's horses, you know, insulin resistance horses, my horse has both. He's 28 years old. He's had both for a long time. I've been managing it. And he gets alfalfa. He gets about, he doesn't get that much. He likes second cut hay, so I do soak it for him. So he gets a treat of second cut hay, very little. And then his alfalfa, I put maybe a half a flake, what you might consider about a half a flake, in his hay bag at night. And he likes that. He likes to dig it out. So he's getting a really good diet. And he's on a ration balancer because of being on low sugar hays. He needs a little bit more of excess vitamins and minerals, but he doesn't need grain. There's no grains. No cereal grains in his diet. Horses can't really digest that well, and they eat it so fast that it does nothing for them. Actually, most of it just is wasted in their stomach, wasted inside of them. And that's another, you know, another reason why it's better to just feed forage with a ration balancer. And I'm not affiliated with Triple Crown in any way, but I do feed my horse Triple Crown Light, which is a very good ration balancer. He only gets 2 pounds a day of it, which is, and it's plenty. Back in February 2020, he had a strangulated lipoma, which is, all horses get lipomas, especially when they're older. And sometimes they get big. And when they get big, they come down. And they form like a tissue, a stalk of tissue. And then as the horse rolls or moves or whatever, it wraps around the small intestine. And that's what happened to him. And this happens, you know, it can happen to older horses. It can happen to younger horses too, but it happens. I was fortunate that my horse, I got him to the hospital fast. They did the surgery. He lost no intestine. He was perfectly healthy. He came through it with no problem at 27 years old. They were amazed. You know, the vets were amazed. And they all said it was because I feed him correctly. I feed him like a horse. And that kept his intestines extremely healthy. So why don't you try it with your horse? Let go of the old, all those old wives' tales. And, you know, the most dangerous thing that I've ever heard anybody say about feeding a horse is, well, that's the way it's always been done. And it's been done wrong. So thank you for joining me. And I'll see you next video. Ta-ta.